And welcome back for our last session on our virtual conference day, Spotlight on Australia and New Zealand, supported by foundational partner, GreenSpark Group. I am tuning in from the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, and the Tsuut'ina and the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and Métis Nation Region 3 in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Please use the chat function and tell us where you are tuning in from. And if you aren't sure, check out native-land.ca. A global movement is underway as organizations worldwide redouble their commitments to progress. Today, we'll hear from leaders in Australia and New Zealand as they provide insights on the new initiatives and the challenges that they face today. Guest speakers joining us today are Maree Cochrane, Executive Director, Sustainable Screens Australia, Craig Gainsborough, Chair Greenlit, Damon, Gameau, co-founder and creative director at Regen Studios, and moderator Belinda Johnson, program director, GreenSet. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Hi, everybody. Really, really great to be here and really pleased to meet Craig and Maree and Damon. So I think we'll jump right in. Maree, shall we start with you? I think if we can go around and everybody can just tell us a little bit about themselves, that'll be great.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. I would also just like to start by acknowledging the lands that I'm on. So I'm on the lands of the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation. And for those that know Australia, that's in northern New South Wales, so up near the border of Queensland. And I'd like to pay my respect to their continued connection to land, skies and water here, and for preserving this country for 65,000 plus years, and to acknowledge any traditional owners and custodians that might be joining this session today. So yes, I am the inaugural Executive Director of Sustainable Screens Australia. We're a tiny brand new organisation that launched in June. And my background, I spent the first sort of 10 years of my career working largely as an assistant director. So I was on set from a very young age, doing all the, pushing paper around, looking at water bottles, freaking out about our impact on the environment largely. And it got to a point in my life where I thought, that's probably a little bit too much and I need to do something that's a little different. So I actually left and I studied sustainability. Then I taught leadership, sustainability leadership in New South Wales and Victoria. And then I went into behaviour change. So I'd been working in a learning team with the Victorian government that was really about changing the behaviour of people within government to help us develop policies and services that were better suited to the Australians with better outcomes. So when this role came along, it was kind of the nexus of all of my background. And so I jumped on board to see what I could do to try to reshape the Australian screen industry so that it can be more environmentally sustainable.
Thanks, Maree. And Craig?
Kia ora, I'm Craig Gainsborough. I'm calling in today from Tamaki Makaurau, Aotearoa, which is Auckland in New Zealand. And just a quick mihi to any tangata whenua on the call, and thank you for all of your support in the creation of Greenlit. And yeah, my background is actually as an independent producer. So I started out as a independent producer, and I kind of saw the need for a bit more sustainability in our sector, and have worked with a team of industry professionals to found and create Greenlit, which is here to support the screen sector in Aotearoa to become more environmentally sustainable.
Thanks, Craig. Damon, do you want to jump in? I think a lot of people know who you are.
I've just perfectly timed some kind of construction work that's just kicked off above me, so I'm sorry if you hear some loud hacksawing and drills. I'll proceed. I'm a filmmaker. I'm based in Australia as well. And what my company does is really marry films, but with extensive impact campaigns. So we collaborate with different philanthropic groups and NGOs and other organizations to, I guess, give people somewhere to go after they've watched a film and they're feeling a particular emotion, whether it's anger or rage or hope, that we can then turn that into emotion into some kind of tangible action. So we've developed everything from curriculum materials to policy documents to apps for phone. And a lot of films we focus on are trying to improve people's health or planetary health. A lot of focus on ecological storytelling and then marrying that to ways that people can contribute to solutions, whether that's financially or with their own time. So yeah, I'm a passionate advocate that stories are an untapped resource in our plight to change and make a better world. And they've been really underused. And I think they are a very, very powerful tool, and we need to tell better stories.
Thanks, Damon. So Maree, back to you. Do you want to give us a little bit of info on where you're at? You know, what's led up to the development, you know, of your organization and moving forward now in 2023? There's been quite a lot of news about the pilot that's been run by Albert in Australia. So give us a bit more information on that.
Yeah, no problem. So it's sort of typically understood that Australia is about a decade behind our Northern Hemisphere counterparts in terms of having sustainable practices on set. Also, even in some ways telling stories. I know Damon's kind of leading that space in Australia significantly, but we are really significantly behind. So about 3 years ago, 3 women all sort of found each other. They were all doing different pieces in this space. So Anna Kaplan, who actually works with Damon at Regen, Jennifer McAuliffe, who had created a Facebook page around sustainability and trying to find other practitioners, and Tandy Owen, who at the time was working at Channel 10 and was the first sustainable manager that was a role that was created specifically for her. She was working on MasterChef, so she was, you know, terrified of all the food waste that she was seeing day to day. And they all sort of found each other and came together and started talking about what this could look like if the industry actually reformed and started working in a more sustainable way. So once they'd had that sort of initial conversation, they were sort of all re-inspired by each other. They then approached a whole range of funders, broadcasters, commissioning bodies in Australia, and started to bring those people together as a working group to see if there was any appetite from the industry's perspective. So we ran a roundtable. Well, I mean, I wasn't involved in the organisation at the time, but a roundtable was run about 18 months ago. And it was decided that we really did need this to be industry-led, because that was the only way it was going to move forward, and it was only going to get picked up if we did that. It was also established that we really had no data. So we didn't understand what the industry was doing in terms of emissions, what that looked like. We had all of this information from the UK and from the US, from Canada, around what emissions looked like in those spaces, but nothing that was really tangible to hear. And we have a different place, like our biodiversity is quite different. We're a huge land mass. We have a lot of travel. We're largely run by coal in terms of the areas that we largely film within. So we really needed to have some data and understanding of what we were doing. So the working group and the roundtable established that this really needed to be run by an organisation that was individual, that it wasn't going to be attached to any of the funding bodies that Australia have. It wasn't going to be led by Screen Australia or one of the state-based organisations. And then as SSA sort of became formed off the back of that. So the decision was made. Everyone started putting skin in the game by suggesting that they were going to offer seed funding to us so that we could really start building a partnership. And that partnership ended up being with Albert in the UK. So we are the first sort of international, and I know that Canada has been using Albert, US has been using Albert, obviously the UK, but we're the first international partnership of this kind, which basically means that we're piloting having all of their resources available to us as licensees of the carbon calculator tool, but also all their educational content so that we can convert that into something that's more specific to the industry here. So we launched ourselves as an organisation at Sydney Film Festival in June, and then in August we launched the calculator to all our members. So we're just testing the ground at the moment and seeing what the uptake of the calculator is like before we have a larger push out to the rest of the industry. So we're excited about getting people to input data so we understand where we're at, so we get that baseline, and then we're going to do a whole range of educational pieces around the stories that we can tell, as Damon's going to speak to, because we do know that the data is really important, but also it's the behavior change piece, it's the mindset piece, but it's also the influence that we potentially have as an industry that is media savvy, that has a huge global reach. So yeah, so that's sort of where we're at and where we're going to head towards.
Thanks, Maree. Thank you. And Craig, across the Tasman Sea on the other side, do you want to give us a little bit of detail on what's happening in New Zealand. I mean, New Zealand's a green country. It was being known as a very green country, one of the first green parliaments. So it'd be really, really good to hear what's happening in the film industry over there.
I think our situation is quite similar to Australia's. So Maree talks to a lot of the things that, and actually a lot of the similar timeline to what we've been doing things. You know, it's been only in the last couple of years where we've actually done this. We started, whoops, I just made my seat go down. Hold on. There we go. We started Greenlit, 2 years ago, and we actually spent the majority of our time once we started Greenlit working to develop our identity and really root ourselves within Aotearoa as a bicultural country, which has been really wonderful. So that's been a lot of work between Libby Hakaraya, who was actually on another panel today, I believe, with you and myself, and just trying to work out how to incorporate tikanga Māori within our approach for sustainability for the screen sector, which has been a really, really rewarding and really like a wonderful process to go on. And we're feeling pretty excited about where we've got to with that. But yeah, I guess we are in a position now where we've just released our first sort of iteration of the Greenlit resources and tools and our carbon calculator, which we've actually built ourselves in Aotearoa. And we're kind of excited to see how it's going to be taken up by the industry and to kind of see what happens. We suffer also from a data issue, and really one of the drivers for us was, as a predominantly service country, how are we going to deliver on the gross reduction targets of the streamers that we rely upon for this service production? Because all of them have in their CSR and their environmental policies, they've got gross reduction targets, which are stipulated to flow down upon suppliers. But without a baseline in New Zealand, there was no way of actually being able to deliver on that, because we don't even know what our footprint is. So it's a whole process of collecting data, modeling, etc. But our focus, though, in Greenlit as a non-profit, also industry-led society, is actually on initially changing the culture around sustainability on our sets. So we're focusing culture first, compliance second, if that makes sense. Yeah, and I'll talk to some other developments here, which I'm sure some questions will come up for, but that's a little summary.
Thanks, Craig. And Damon, there's a global movement now to change people's perceptions about climate crisis through on-screen messaging. And the stories, you know, when others were making films about how bad things were, you released 2040, which certainly had a huge impact on me. I think I watched it during COVID, and I was quite blown away. So, you know, you're based in Australia, and I just thought it would be good if you could tell us a little bit more about how the local impact that you've had through your engagement and your storytelling.
Yeah, so I think 2040 is probably a good example where, as I was talking about before, we partnered with lots of different organisations so that when the film came out, there were things that people could do after they'd seen the film. And the approach that we took with that was quite different, in that rather than the sort of using a fear narrative, which obviously is really important and plays a role, this sort of tried to pivot that and sort of say, well, what would the world look like on the other side of this crisis if we kind of took the necessary actions that are required, and not in a sort of utopian fancy kind of way, but more in, we called it fact-based dreaming. So everything that was shown in this depicted future had to exist now in some capacity and be able to be acted on or implemented and upscaled. And so that made it really interesting to then find the people on the ground that were aligned with that vision that was portrayed in the film, so that people could go, oh, right, okay, I can contribute right now to this seaweed project that, you know, if scale, could have a huge impact on sequestering carbon and improving marine life. And so we were able to, you know, raise money, often from school children giving $5 or $10 after we did a screening at their schools, to build this sort of prototype of a seaweed platform that would be able to be floated in the water and sequester carbon and all sorts of things like that. So it was just such a great example of marrying storytelling and obviously using a more positive focus as a motivator to change and to say to people, do you want to take part in this collective vision? And you've got a role if you want to play, and we need your help. So we got lots of learnings from that, and then applied it to another film, a shorter film I did recently called Regenerating Australia. And that was a really interesting model in that it was only 17 minutes, but we had a multi-million-dollar fund off the back of that film where we then took that film to 60 towns around Australia and invited them to, if they liked one of the solutions that resonated in the film, they could apply for funding from that multi-million-dollar grant. So it was anywhere from 50,000 to 500,000. And we were able to unearth, in partnership with WWF, about 45 regenerative solutions that were unique to the place that people had seen the film. So it was a really fascinating exercise in, again, using a positive vision, but then marrying it to tangible pathways of action. And so now those initiatives are now rolling out and attracting funding from other sources, hopefully more government funding. And we're now looking to tell the stories of the progress of those initiatives that have been born of that project. So I feel like we've got really strong data now to show that stories are, as I think Craig just alluded to, the culture. Stories shape culture. Culture shapes the leaders, leaders shape the policies, and then policies shape the system. But it starts with a story. And quite often we're telling stories at a time where we need to be engaging and inspiring and enlightening people. We're telling stories that are either distracting them or paralyzing them or making it all too easy just to step away and disengage from what is now a meta crisis, many people are calling. So I do feel that we need to call in the great skills of our storytellers. The advertising agency, $700 billion a year, telling people to buy more stuff that's causing more problems. Imagine we use some of those skills to tell better stories and get people on board to make the changes we would require. So that's really what I've been doing. I've just finished a film with a group of young environmental activists, 8 of them. I took them around Europe. And again, we're looking at what the impact campaign of that is. How do we bring in more children around the world that are passionate about these things so we can form a network? They can advise leaders. We managed to meet the CEO of Nestle and ING with these kids, and they were just extraordinary. And now can we meet other leaders, and can we get other kids to start having these conversations with these kind of people, because they are the ones that are, of course, going to inherit the future. So they should have a say in it, and they should have their voices heard. And that's where stories can play a role if married to these action campaigns.
You just muted there.
There we go. There we go. I mean, that's amazing. Sure. I'm kind of not like, what do I say next? But you were speaking about fact-based dreaming, and we touched on data. Both Craig and Maree touched on data. And Craig, you mentioned that you developed a carbon calculator now in New Zealand. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So we've been basically developing a carbon calculator that's fit for purpose for Aotearoa. I think one of the things that you really notice when you talk to sustainability consultants and people working in this space in our sector around the world is that every place around the world has a different way of working and a different way of doing things. And those differences can seem small, but they can actually have kind of bigger effects and implications as you kind of start to create processes and start to create tools to support them. So yeah, we've built a carbon calculator. I can actually share my screen with you if you like. And we didn't plan this at all. And I will show you basically what we've done. So yeah, it's a carbon calculator that builds upon other models that we've seen around the world. There's actually quite a few popping up around the world now, certainly quite a few in Europe. But our calculator goes to the extent of also calculating daily commutes for all the people that attend your shoot, where you can actually specify shoot days, and it automatically retrieves vehicle data, distances between shoot locations and home locations and everything, with a bit of an onboarding process for crew, which then also helps to educate crew upon their sustainability responsibilities. So it's quite a comprehensive system that we've tried to build in with the way that production effectively works naturally, so that it's less of like a learning and a new like a shock factor to teams, and more of more intuitive. And Yeah, so it's going to be a bit of a process. I'll jump baseline calculator, but this is effectively what we're talking about in terms of data. So at the moment, we're using data from other parts of the world to create a baseline estimation for a production, so that we know roughly where a production should be sitting, based upon the number of minutes, the format, etc. But as we collect more data, we're going to be able to refine this and be able to create a model which you can input your budget, input your number of episodes and minutes, and hopefully get a far more accurate baseline for where your production should be sitting, and then how you can reduce gross emissions from there, which then gets, this is just a test one, which then gets reflected, and you can actually get a figure for a gross emissions result, which is kind of cool. Yeah, that's the top line. So that's been a bit of a journey for the last year, and yeah, we're quite excited to put it to the test now and see how it gets adopted.
Great. So you have launched it already. You mentioned that the local producers were kind of knocking on your door before you guys kind of got through the development phase of that. So
yeah, I think that's what's been really kind of quite cool here is I think the New Zealand filmmakers are really keen, like they all want to be implementing sustainable production practices, and there's like a desire and a hunger for it. The problem is that nobody knows what to do, they're not supported in it, and they don't know how to approach it. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do, is to try and demystify the process, provide the tools and resources, provide support, so that it just removes we're trying to reduce when people say the word sustainability, right, it's like overbearing. It's like, oh my God, your head just goes to everything. There's so many different, it's such a heavy loaded word, so it's about breaking that down and just going, actually, it's just, it's just this, then this, then this, and then we'll grow from there. And just trying to kind of create like a really clear pathway for people to step into it and make that easy.
thanks, Craig. So we've chatted a little bit about data. Anybody else want to have anything to say about data? Maree, Damon, you mentioned data earlier as well when you were chatting.
I can talk a little bit about data. I mean, I can't add too much more to what Craig has just said, because yeah, likewise, we're using UK baseline data right now until we have enough people inputting information into the calculator, the carbon calculator from Albert, to make sure that we understand what's happening here. But I also think the thing about data is it's really great to have, and it's been really important to measure and understand where you are at as a country, so that you can move forward from that place. And also, just to, I guess, reiterate on Craig and also Damon's points, this is also about a huge cultural shift, and it's about making people understand that it's not just that, it's also about all these other practices that you might not be able to measure. It's about, going to a set, and I think this might even be your example from our chat yesterday, Craig, but going to a set and you accidentally break a branch off a tree, and it's acknowledging the fact that that's actually come from the environment, and that's a piece that's really important to the way we all sort of live and work. And we're nothing without the planet. We don't have a home, we don't live here, we don't get to do the things that we love to do. And so I think once you start to bring those larger concepts into conversation, it really lands with a lot of people. And like Craig, we're having huge amounts of interest here in terms of inputting data into the calculator, but also those people that are feeling overwhelmed by that, they're actually really excited about the prospect of what it looks like to create sustainable stories, to talk about things in a different way, whether it's hopeful, whether it's mentioning an EV in a passing conversation. There's so many ways that we can be referring to and making sure that we're putting the planet in the center of all the stuff that we're doing.
Thanks, Maree. Damon, do you want to jump in on there? Otherwise, I'm going to move to technology and having a chat about that. Great. So yeah, just tools from a technology point of view that you've seen in your area. Maree, you mentioned a company in Australia that is starting to build battery units, battery storage units. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I should totally tell them that I'm talking about them because they're so infant. Their website isn't even like live. It says that we're in the cocoon. But so there's a company in Melbourne called Acquia. They are building these battery storage units, and they're being piloted by a whole range of productions in Victoria right now. And it's amazing to see what unit managers are posting about these things. So, you know, they'll be showing all of this stuff going on, then they'll walk up to it and say, what can you hear? Nothing. And it's so exciting that not only, you know, they're getting through, you know, at least 3/4 of their day just using this battery and powering everything. So powering the camera truck, powering the unit truck, you know, everything is getting powered by this thing. And it's resulting in no noise. It's tiny. It's, you know, it would be like 1/4 of the size of most generators that you know, dragging around on trailers to set. And it's like in Australia, we use so much petrol in so much diesel in our traveling around. And so just having this thing on set is it's gonna shift the way people are thinking about what's possible. So yeah, Acquia, I can look up their Instagram account. You can hit them up. I'll post it for you.
Thanks, Maree. Damon, did you see a big shift when you went? Sorry, so just what's interesting, I think, on that is that, you know, they're developing those units now. And from a data point of view, you guys are going to have an opportunity to put the data in while you're still using diesel generators. And once that shift starts to happen, you know, then look at the data again and go, well, by swapping out those diesel generators, you know, this is the change that we've seen within our fuel usage and how that's lowered the carbon footprint. So that's really exciting. And Damon, when you traveled around Europe, was there, you know, what was your experience on film sets over there? Did you see a big difference and a shift towards more sustainable solutions?
Probably not, no, sadly. I mean, I'm probably not the best person to speak about it because only just recently, you know, it was a pretty ad hoc adventure across Europe with 40 people and kids and a coach and 5 camera trucks. So we were pretty on the go, but there was definitely a discussion and an endeavor to do things far better. And I don't think that conversation would have been as prevalent before. I mean, even when we did 2040 in Australia, it was so hard to do the right thing. We wanted to practice what we preach in that film and made sure that we offset everything we used and do more than that and even make it a carbon positive film. And we got our crew and we planted a sort of 2040 forest and all sorts of things. But the rigmarole to even make that happen was really difficult. And, you know, unfortunately, as Maree can attest, you go to a set in Australia now and we're still, you know, doing the basics, you know, whether it's plastic bottles or just the things that come on, we should be, this is the low hanging fruit that we're still a long way behind. So yeah, that was disappointing, especially when I got to Europe, especially given the film that we were making and there were 8 young environmentalists from around the world. And on day one, there was just, you know, tiny bottles of water handed out to all the kids. And it was like, you know, come on, we talked about this. But at the end of the day, if it's cost effective and it's easy, and especially when you're doing documentaries, it's too easy to cut corners. And that's what I think the others are alluding to as well. How do we embed this at a deeper level? So it isn't just a kind of nice box to tick that you add on, but it just becomes the way that we produce and the way that we run our sets. And that you just don't imagine it being done another way. So I hope we get to that place in the decades ahead, but certainly in this country, we have a long way to go. As you can probably see by our politics, you can probably see by some of our climate policies. We should be leading the world with our renewable energy and wind resources that we have here. But sadly, we still make a lot of money from fossil fuels. And so that affects our culture and that affects how we behave. And we're a very excessive society in Australia, and we live a very lucky and good life. But these sort of sustainability issues haven't quite permeated the mainstream yet. They're on their way, but film sets, haven't got there yet. Right.
Well, I'm hoping your stories are going to change people's perception. It sounds like you're already doing that one story at a time. So that's really exciting. And then Craig, over to you. Culture first, compliance second. So how are you finding with, implementing this with crew? Have you had the opportunity yet to roll out the program onto film sets?
Yeah, we've had 1 or 2 shoots already rolling out this program. So our data is pretty limited there in that space. And those shoots, as you can imagine, we're probably quite receptive to it from the start. But I think the key is I think the key in culture versus compliance is actually, it's about changing our mindsets on set. So it's actually I was down at Māori land, which is run by Libby Hakaraya, and there was a lady from a First Nations lady who was there from I think from Canada, who spoke about basically taking a moment at the start of each day on set to appreciate the land and where you were and honor it as a crew. You know, if you think about your safety briefings in the morning, just taking a moment to also appreciate where you are. And just a simple act like that really sets the tone for an entire day. And that's the kind of stuff that starts to change culture, because suddenly like an awareness of the land, suddenly a care for the land is front and center for everybody. So that's, I'm really interested in those kind of spaces, and I think there's a lot that we can learn from the Indigenous voice in that space and with their relationship with the land. And so I think that's what I mean by culture first, but I think it's also got to do with setting the culture of your production from the start. And this ties into another thing that I keep preaching, which is strategy over reactivity. So what I'm really concerned with is establishing the culture of the shoot from the very start, where the action plan, for example, which is done, and the action plan that I think I use the terminology slightly differs from other action plans around the world. Ours is more like a strategy for how you're going to implement sustainability across your shoot, rather than a yes/no question box. And that starts right at the very beginning of production, before you onboard your HODs. So we're advocating for that, so that as your production designer comes on board, their procurement process is already within the already considering sustainable solutions from the get-go, rather than having a sustainability coordinator or officer for example, coming on in pre-production where they've already established ways of working. So bringing it at the start, because, you know, we're all pressured, we've all got like not much money, not much time, and if we're trying to change processes that we're already working in once we've already started working in them, it's far harder than just making small changes to processes at the start before we start the work. And then progressively over time, once we get used to ways of working, we can then expand and grow on them. You know, one production you might change from using a polystyrene to a fungi-based, for example, product, and then the next production you do something else, and that it's that growth over time towards solving this, and not necessarily expecting everything and everyone to change overnight as well.
Thanks, Craig. You'd said earlier something really interesting. You spoke about a sustainability manager as opposed to a sustainability coordinator. And I think, you know, on set, sustainability crew have been called different things, depending on who you're working for and, you know, who the streamer is. But that was really interesting to me, because often I've found, you know, having been running on big shows for about 3 years now, the sustainability crew are down right at the end of the passage, right next to the toilet, and and often, you know, just to get onto a technical recce, you've got to go, I want to be on the technical recce, please, and they say, no, there's no room in the bus, you know, we'll send you notes. So that was really interesting. You know, when you were speaking, you want to just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing in Aotearoa is we've been developing the definition for what a sustainability department looks like on a crew. And we've been building our approach in parallel a lot with what the health and safety industry has done for sets, because, you know, that's a model that people understand and know. And so if you can take that and apply that to environmental sustainability, you immediately break down a whole lot of adoption barriers, because people understand the model. And then expanding on that, the decision to use the term sustainability manager, that's about power. And I guess if you talk about a coordinator, right, they sit within like film's quite hierarchical, and that's another conversation we won't get into. But the term coordinator implies a certain position within a crew. And like somebody who's a coordinator is obviously going to get overridden by somebody who's a production manager. So what we're keen to do is to elevate the status of sustainability personnel on set, and basically respect their contributions at that same level as a manager. And that's got to do with the strategy of starting early, because if you think about also when you bring a coordinator onto a shoot, it's in pre-production, not before. So it's got to do with that. And it's also got to do with enabling them to have the power to actually make changes within the shoot, or to guide. And I use the word guide because that's similar to what a health and safety officer does on set, right? They're not there to literally tape down every electrical wire. They're there to support the crew. They're there to guide. They're there to provide that, to provide that knowledge base, and that, that mana that can improve health and safety for everybody, make sure everybody gets home safe. So same sort of idea.
Thanks, Craig. Maree, can you tell us a little bit about obstacles and challenges that you're facing?
Great question. So, I mean, look, we're 10 years behind. That's definitely been challenging to try to, because so many international productions get filmed in Australia. And so to try to get crew up to speed for those productions before we existed was a real struggle for the people that Craig's referred to, those sustainability managers or coordinators or officers or stewards even, that have been on set and trying to make that really significant contribution in HOD meetings when, they're quite junior, and it's sort of not flying. So that's definitely been a challenge. So the fact that we're sort of here, and I've heard the way Craig's sort of approached that piece of work last night, it's definitely lit up a lot of inspiration of what we could be doing to push in a similar direction in Australia. But I also think that, as Damon's referenced, there's a lot of people here that it's really about the water bottles. Like the number of conversations I've had about, we've stocked water bottles, but it's like, well done. I'm really stoked that you're doing that. It's really important, but like we really need to understand what the impact of a whole range of actions looks like, and to be thinking about accommodation through to business class travel, and all of these kinds of things have a much bigger impact on the planet. And so I guess getting that message across is where we're at, and that's definitely being taken seriously by a lot of the people that I'm talking to on the day-to-day basis, because they're already in the tent, they want to do the thing, and they want the data to help them communicate that forward. But it's when you're trying to have a conversation about okay, cool, so like LED lighting, let's explore that, but also that feeling like for a DOP, well, I'm not going to be able to establish the kind of shot that I want if I use that kind of lighting. And so coming up with solutions where we're talking to industry to find out what's coming up in the development of lights that would be able to sort of suggest they test. So I guess for us, it's trying to marry, the industry people that we know well with also the suppliers that are starting to work in spaces that are more sustainable. So that feels like that's a pretty big piece of work. We developed a supplier database, and we thought we sent it out to 250 people in Australia, and I think we've got 10 or 11 people on there right now. And so it's it's even just, because we're so infant, it's really just getting knowledge out that we exist, that we're here to support, that we really want to encourage everyone to work collaboratively, because that's, we're 1.9 FTE, our whole organization, including me. And so to suggest that we have all the answers and that we can do everything is crazy. So we need to understand what's needed and how we can support people to do the work themselves, but bring people together.
Thanks, Maree. We don't have too much time left, about 5 minutes. Damon, can you give us a bit of a kind of, in a nutshell, any last thoughts before we kind of cross over to the Q&A? Can I throw that out to you?
Sure. I guess I'm sort of offering a slightly different take to Maree and Craig, but I think all of these things need to happen concurrently. And I hope most people on this call understand the great superpower they have right now as a storyteller. And as I said before, I think it's been an undervalued agent of change. And I think of a story actually that really resonated with me, which was in the early 1980s, in 1983, there was a film shown on American television called The Day After, and it depicted the aftermath of a potential nuclear war between Russia and America. And until recently, it was actually the most watched television show in history. It had 100 million Americans watch that show that night. And the way they structured it is they ended the session with a discussion between Kissinger and Carl Sagan. They handed out all sorts of pamphlets that educated the public around nuclear war. But Ronald Reagan happened to be watching the show that night. And he said after the fact that it fundamentally changed his attitude to policy on nuclear weapons. And he did a screening of it to all his Joint Chiefs of Staff, who just stood there completely stunned, apparently. He then reached out to Gorbachev. They showed the film in Russia. And 4 years later, in 1997, it led to a proliferation, a treaty that was amended around nuclear war. So this is the power of story. You know, this is what we're capable of. And we can tinker around the edges and we can make our sets better, which is so important. But if we're going to get the true systemic change and the cultural shift we need to embed these values that we want implemented on our sets, then we've got to tell better stories, and we've got to wrap these beautiful facts in stories that move people and stir them. It's not enough just to share facts, as Maree was talking about before. We've done that. We've tried that. We've pushed out endless graphs. But unless those graphs are encased in narratives that stir the soul, we're not going to shift the people. We're a species that's evolved to tell stories. And I think that's our real power as in this industry right now, is how can we tell less stories that distract and more stories that inspire and educate.
And how do we get funding for those stories, I guess, is also...
That's too difficult a question. That's a whole panel on that one. Yeah.
Oh, come on.
No, I definitely think, certainly from our experience, and again, Australia's, I guess, quite far behind, but we have had a sort of a climate reckoning, which when we had our fires in 2019 and 2020, and certainly in our circles, we saw a huge shift of philanthropic funding from families and groups that wanted to support telling better stories and wanted to shift the culture around some of these issues and are starting to understand how important storytelling can be. So I do think there's an opportunity. I know a lot of families are going through successions where, the older established money is handing over to younger generations and they're working out what to do with that money. So I do think there's an opportunity. And as we know, things are only going to intensify in the decade ahead, that, if we can set ourselves up and prepare people to show them how important stories are, some of that money might be available as we move forward.
Great. When are you coming to Africa? Because I'm thinking, how do we roll this out, in rural communities in Africa? How do we get those environmental stories out to people?
It's funny, we did when we did the Regenerating Australia. There's a really interesting model there of filmmaking and storytelling and NGOs and whatnots and philanthropic organizations. So a couple of people have reached out. Actually, a group said, could we do a Regenerating Canada, even a Regenerating Ukraine? So who knows? Maybe in 10 years, we've done a Regenerating Africa as well.
Great. Craig, closing thoughts and comments from your side?
Oh, I'm just listening to Damon. That's so inspirational. Thank you. That's really cool. Closing thoughts from me. I think I just wanted to mention, there's often people get fixated on your kind of like the net emissions and, with offsetting and all of that. But I think we kind of lose track of the goal when we start talking about net emissions, which is really the gross emissions reduction. And so I'm just talking now about carbon emissions, which is actually, but the gross emissions reduction is the main objective. And so because I've noticed that there might be some questions around, I'm sorry, I'm totally losing my train of thought here, but I think that's just my important note, is that we just got to keep an eye on the gross emissions reduction, and actually accounting for things like commuting, accounting for things like flights, all of these things. While they raise kind of the overall emissions, it's going to be hard to reduce gross emissions if we're not aware of where all of our impacts are. And so I think it's trying to just encourage people to be less afraid about having maybe what looks like a bigger emission, because that's actually an opportunity to then reduce in the future, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Maree?
I'm just going to pick up on something that Damon said around, and your question around funding. Alone was a program that screened in Australia quite recently, and it's SBS, one of the broadcasters here. It's one of their most successful programs screened ever. And to me, that suggests that there's actually demand from audiences to see programming that's quite different. And Alone, you know, you could look at Alone in lots of different ways, but the fact is that there were the people that were selected, the way that they treated country, like there was acknowledgements offered on screen by participants in that as they started that process. It's not about battling with nature. It's about working with nature to stay alive for a period of time. Like, there's so many parts of the framing of that story that obviously resonated. And so I don't think it's going to be very long before we are seeing a lot more funding towards those projects, because we're educating young people too through SSA, and the kinds of questions that they're having, I'm like, wow, that is extraordinary. You're so far in advance of, you know, some of the people that we've been talking to date. So I feel like that we're really in this place of it going to be a demand by citizens that we see more of this content. So I think that's just going to naturally flow into funding opportunities.
I reckon if someone can make a show, like think about Alone, you think about Survivor and like how they shape our values. It's like, I want someone to make a show called Survivors, which is like about a group of people that have to work together to survive on an island and grow some food. Or maybe it's not alone, it's like together. And the show's about how we find peace with each other to, you know, build a bit. It's so interesting how these narratives get out there and suddenly it's about a survival of the fittest and I've got to do it on my own. It's like, that's not actually how we evolve. That's not who we are. Why don't we tell stories about coming together? So it's a great example, Maree. Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's create it.
I mean, I have a 15-year-old and it's amazing, you know, just how on so many levels, little things that I never used to think about and still don't think about that they just do because of the conscious awareness of the environment and the crisis that we're facing. Okay, guys, thanks very much. I should go over to the questions and just run through. We've got a couple of questions here, and I think you guys can all see them on the screen. So just starting from the top and running through, Craig, in your development, did you discover that you captured more impact by tracking daily commutes than capturing all the fuel consumed in the production? Not challenging your method, but curious, as I've tried more to see all the fuel consumed under production.
Okay, so a bit of context there. So New Zealand, a lot of people come to film here because it's a location destination. So the intention of tracking the daily commutes is to actually capture the data for the 100 or more vehicles that are traveling from home to a shoot, which might be 100 kilometers way up a mountain and then back every day. So because that's generally just gets lost or missed because it's personal vehicles. So that was the intention with the daily commute tool. So it's not mutually exclusive to capturing all the fuel consumed in production, it's in addition to. So it will definitely mean that there's more impact tracked, but that is still real impact that is occurring as a result of undertaking that production. So we're going to refine the model as we go, and we'll refine that process of accounting for it. There's a lot of considerations we need to do there, like what is considered natural working distance, for example, for somebody who might travel to work in town every day comparatively, and where the responsibility lies for that. So for now, we've kind of got an initial iteration, and we'll just keep working on it and keep refining it. But I think it's an interesting thing to track, and I'm just really curious to see what actually comes out of it, and just see what actually is that impact. Yeah.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, we built a calculator a couple of years back, and just having a look at what you guys have done, I'm completely blown away. I just had a question with the commute tool. Is that something that it's almost going to be like a plugin where the crew can feed that information in to some kind of a system or tracking? Do they have like access in part to that calculation?
It's an onboarding form. So when you are onboarded at the start of production, you get a link to this form. this form asks you a number of sustainability questions, which enables the sustainability officer to also get an idea for, how much support you as an individual crew member might need with other sustainability things. It asks for the suburb where you live, not your address, because obviously people get a bit funky giving out their addresses. So it asks for the suburb you live, and then it asks for your vehicle information, which is actually just a license plate number, because we've got a national database where we can get basic information on a vehicle from the license plate number. That's non-private information, basically just vehicle, engine size, etc., etc. So, and then it automatically calculates it based upon where the shoot locations are each day, etc. So we've tried to automate the process as much as possible, so it reduces the workload on our teams.
Thanks, Craig. Maree, if you could tell us or talk a little bit about, we've got a question, can you discuss how incentives might play a part in supporting this evolution for change?
That's a good one. I actually wonder if Damon can talk to this more, because he's probably actually dealt with the organizations that fund the projects that he's working on. But in terms of so what I foresee happening in Australia is that there's going to be at some point a mandate that comes into play where you'll have to report the emissions that you're using. And as a result of that, it's probably going to be that people are going to request or productions are going to request that they have a line item, a green line, which has been happening around the world for some time in their budget. In Australia, there's also production companies that are a little bit more advanced and they're already putting green lines in their budget. So 0.05 is yes, that's right, is sort of the standard line item. And the way that that's being used is that there's someone that's attached to that production that works specifically with sustainability, and they will speak to all the heads of department to work out how that line item is going to get used for their particular area. So in terms of incentives that are coming from funders, it's not something, it's something that we're in conversation with all of the different screen agencies in Australia around offering, because if there's going to be mandates, if there's going to be interest in making sure that our sets are much more sustainable, then there's going to have to be some kind of funding that goes towards that. And at the same time that there's many productions here that are already doing that work and finding that there's cost savings. So, we're sort of playing in both fields, but as we're still like a really young organization, it's really having a lot of exploratory chats to find out what that can look like and how you can actually start stealing from your own budget to make sure that you're ensuring that you're doing this work. But Damon, did you, are there incentives that you're sort of tapped into that I'm not aware of yet?
No, I mean, what we found was been interesting is how do you, when you're working with funders who are so purely focused on the financial metrics or the returns, and that's what they're used to, how do you show these other metrics of like social impact? And so we've been trying to find different ways of measuring the impact of this project or a film, and like, all right, how many farmers have we helped switch to regenerative practices? How many, initiatives around a particular ecological solution have been implemented? How much money have we raised for those solutions? How many children have been taught the curriculum materials? So it's a really, Nora Bateson talks about warm data. It's like, how do you, especially when we're telling stories, how do you kind of quantify or measure that? But this idea of incentives, I think, is really important given the social nature of us as human beings. And I remember visiting this school, university actually in Oberlin in Ohio, and they were the first in the world to put up these eco dashboards around their towns, and they put them in libraries and in cafes and the schools, and they just display all the metrics of the town so people could see how much energy was being used and transport emissions, and it just suddenly made visible the invisible. But what they did with the local schools is they started to run this competition with a considerable prize each year about who would be the most eco-minded school. And so suddenly the students were incentivized to kind of win this prize, and they had these Olympics going on. And I love the idea in our industry of like, why shouldn't the Oscars hand out a bloody award in 5 years from now about the greenest production, or like actually make it something that people can strive for? Otherwise, it is going to continue to be this thing that we just tack on to the end. So that's that deeper embedded values change that's been talked about today. Because otherwise, we're just going to we're going to tiptoe around the edges of this stuff. We've got to other than financial, we've got to make better incentives for people so that this is the right thing to do, and we have to do it. I mean, that's the reality. We're going to be forced to do it at some point. Nature's eventually going to intervene, and it's starting to intervene already, but we're going to be forced into these changes. So we really need to get on with it.
Thanks, Damon. I think we're pretty much out of time. We're sitting at 3:10 now. Just any last comments? We got it.
Yeah, I might put a last one in if that's okay. I just want to say, like, I think one of the things that really that I felt really good about recently is seeing how much desire there is amongst sustainability consultants, sustainability managers, sustainability people working in the space internationally to collaborate and to share. And I think, you know, this just speaks to Damon's point before about community. Like I can feel there's that community forming internationally with people who care about this space. And that is so heartening, because that's what's going to make a big difference is if we all stop kind of trying to protect our courts and actually just tackle this issue together, because it affects all of us. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. It's really inspiring.
Thanks, Craig. I just see there is one more question that's come through here, which is relating to incentives and just whether any of the territories out there are offering any, you know, sustainability incentives, you know, any governments that are looking at saying, hey, if you guys come and film here, we're going to give you an additional, you know, an additional percentage on rebate. I mean, it would be great to see that happening. I don't know if that is happening out there yet in any of your territories. It's certainly not happening in my territory. No. Okay, thanks everybody. I think our time's pretty much up. So it's been amazing chatting with everybody. Wow, I'm blown away, and I'll definitely be keeping in contact with all of you. And Damon, I hope you come and visit us soon.
I echo that. I'm a little speechless, actually, not only from this absolutely fabulous panel, but just everything from the day. So I'm going to end it here with just thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your insights with today's speakers, including this fabulous group in our leadership positions. This evolution in our industry is unstoppable. I really feel that this energy, it's so powerful, and it's so positive. It's so innovative. It's so fun. So thank you so much for sharing everything you shared today. And I just really appreciate your time and your energy. I share a heartfelt thank you to all of our speakers from today and all of our partners for their invaluable support. Please get to know them. So this is to everybody in our audience. Click on our speakers' profiles, connect with them, ask them questions, check out our partners, get to know them, ask them questions. Okay, that's why we have this online platform, because this is a global movement. As Craig just said, we all need to work together, and I think we're in agreement on that. So lastly, I'd just like to close with thank you to the dreamers, the creators, and the innovators who are relentlessly working to reimagine a better world for everyone. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart at SPF and our whole team. Thank you.